While the world was debating Africa's digital future, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was busy building it. No announcements, no fanfare, no permission asked. In just 22 minutes on a dusty August morning in Ouagadougou, the 37-year-old leader of Burkina Faso didn't just make a speech. He declared the end of digital colonialism for 22 million people. What you're about to hear isn't just about telecommunications. It's about the moment a small, landlocked nation in West Africa decided to stop asking for permission to control its own destiny. This is the story of how Burkina Faso built what nobody thought was possible, a completely sovereign digital network that operates entirely independent of Western control. Picture this. A packed room in Ouagadougou, reporters sweating under the Sahel sun, local engineers standing proudly alongside security officers. Then Captain Traoré steps to the podium and delivers news that would send shockwaves through every boardroom from Paris to Silicon Valley. Faso Telecom is here. Not coming, not planned, here. Operating, functional, sovereign. The numbers he rattled off weren't proposals. They were achievements. 4,200 kilometers of fiber optic cable, laid not by foreign contractors, but by Burkinabé hands across hills, deserts, and hard earth. 65 ground-based satellite stations, constructed not in European factories, but within Burkina Faso's own borders. And the coverage? 92% of the nation, reaching from the outskirts of Fata Gourma to the rocky edges of Goram Goram. But here's what made headlines around the world: the price tag. $1.2 billion US. Not borrowed from the IMF, not handed down by the World Bank, not tied to European credit lines or Chinese infrastructure deals. This was Burkina Faso's money, redirected from its own resources into its own future. For 27 years, Burkina Faso's telecommunications backbone had been under private contracts controlled by French conglomerates whose profit margins actually exceeded the country's healthcare budget. Think about that for a moment. A foreign company was making more money from Burkinabé phone calls than the government was spending on keeping its people healthy. Data storage was hosted in Paris. Internet traffic was routed through European nodes. Licensing fees were locked in foreign currencies. And when protests erupted in the capital in 2021, entire provinces were cut off, not by their own government, but by companies headquartered thousands of miles away in Marseille. Who made those decisions? Who answered for the silencing of an entire people's voice? The answer was nobody in Burkina Faso, and that's exactly what Traoré set out to change. So, how does a nation with a GDP barely in the top 10 of African economies pull off what wealthier countries have failed to realize? The answer lies in something revolutionary. They redirected their own wealth instead of begging for someone else's. Military expenditures once used to host foreign troops were repurposed. Gold mining royalties that had been extracted and exported with minimal return were seized, renegotiated, and funneled back into the ground, this time as fiber optic cables. The Telecommunications Sovereignty Fund, established in late 2023, captured domestic levies that had previously been paid to overseas carriers. Those funds didn't leave the country, they dug deeper into it. But money was only part of the equation. The real revolution was in human capital. The National Corps of Engineers, a team of 647 Burkinabé scientists and technicians, 83% of them under 35 years old, was trained right there in Ouagadougou and based in Koudougou. These weren't household names a year ago. Today, they stand behind a digital revolution that's reshaping how we think about technological sovereignty. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Faso Telecom's infrastructure wasn't built from some borrowed blueprint. The routing logic was mapped using geographic data collected by Burkinabé satellites. Cables were manufactured in regional facilities. Towers and stations were designed specifically for Saharan climates, with thermal resistance that could handle extreme heat, dusty terrain, irregular electricity, and sudden flash rains. Ask yourself this: what foreign corporation would have cared enough to consider these uniquely African conditions? The answer is none, because their profits weren't tied to the long-term success of Burkina Faso's people. The project timeline is staggering. Starting in March 2024, they didn't just plan this infrastructure, they executed it. 211 relay towers built from local steel, 65 satellite uplinks calibrated by software written in local languages, mobile network management platforms coded by developers trained at the Faso Tech Institute, which had only opened 16 months earlier. At the heart of this system lies something extraordinary. A fusion of physical infrastructure and open-source software written, audited, and maintained by a coding core entirely under 30 years old. When African fiber meets African-built firewalls, when switching protocols run on Burkinabé firmware, you get something the world has never seen before. Technology that thinks like its people. 2 hours west of Ouagadougou, in the red sands of Koudougou, sits a Tier 4 data center that processes over 2.5 million concurrent connections. It's been tested under simulated cyber attacks, local power disruptions, and severe heat conditions. Its uptime in the last quarter, 99.8%. But here's what makes this facility truly revolutionary. The engineers didn't import a Western template. They designed load balancing algorithms specifically responsive to Sahel weather patterns. Cooling systems were built using evaporative panels sourced locally. Emergency protocols include multilingual alerts in Mooré, Fulfulde, and Dioula, and the operating systems that bind these machines, not proprietary, not leased. An OpenStack protocol modified specifically for Burkina Faso's needs, authored by 3 graduates from the first cohort of Faso Tech Institute. The morning after Faso Telecom's announcement, something interesting happened in Paris. The stock exchange recorded a sharp dip in shares of Orange SA, the French telecom giant that had operated in Burkina Faso for nearly 3 decades. The company had officially lost its operational license by executive decree, and suddenly, what had been treated as a business dispute took on the weight of something far more significant. International media reacted predictably. The Guardian warned of unregulated state control of communications. CNN Africa questioned whether centralization would be weaponized against dissent. The Economist ran a feature titled, "Can Burkina Faso be trusted with its own data?" But here's the question they were really asking. Is it dangerous when a formerly colonized nation wants to store its own files? If code written in Mooré isn't legible in Palo Alto, does that make it a threat? President Traoré's response was characteristically direct. We do not silence voices. We simply disconnected from those who never respected ours. What makes Faso Telecom truly revolutionary isn't just its infrastructure. It's its philosophy. There are no pricing tiers, no premium plans, no bronze, silver, platinum access levels. There's no app to download data packages, no SMS codes to buy minutes. It's a system built not to monetize connection, but to liberate it. The principle is beautifully simple. If you're within signal range, you're within the system. Education, healthcare, and agriculture receive unrestricted bandwidth through the national grid. Whether you own a smartphone or a recycled tablet, connection to these essential services is automatic. In rural highlands, a 12-year-old boy logs in every morning using a device powered by solar panels. The platform loads in Mooré. His lessons, geometry, ecology, basic anatomy, are recorded by volunteer teachers from the University of Ouagadougou. They speak his dialect. His progress is backed up to a national server farm, not shipped off to Silicon Valley for analysis and advertising. Since June, over 2.1 million Burkinabé citizens have accessed medical portals through the Faso Health Grid. Crop reports distributed via Faso FarmNet have reached 130,000 smallholder farmers. Birth registration APIs processed 88,000 digital entries, reducing paper dependency by 47% within just 4 months. These numbers didn't rise because of government subsidies or foreign aid. They rose because, for the first time, there was no intermediary extracting value from every digital interaction. Think about the implications. What changes when a child's first click isn't a Western app but a local classroom? What happens when the first voice a newborn hears in a medical database speaks Mooré, not Mandarin? What becomes possible when digital language isn't imported but native? What happened in Ouagadougou wasn't an anomaly, it was a signal. As of July, Faso Telecom operates without a single foreign hardware dependency. Over 91% of system components are either manufactured domestically or sourced through South-South partnerships. the data sovereignty protocols applied by Faso Tech engineers now form the basis of draft legislation being considered in Malawi and Sierra Leone. In Kinshasa, ICT students study Faso's network architecture as part of their final thesis modules. In Addis Ababa, African Union representatives quietly requested a closed-door demonstration of the Faso switching encryption engine. In Ghana, opposition MPs are asking the obvious question: if they can build it, why can't we? This isn't mimicry, it's momentum. What happens when technology isn't an import but a birthright? When broadband cables are laid with intention and servers reflect indigenous logic. Traoré's team has remained largely silent with international press, but insiders report plans to extend FasoNet into neighboring regions across Mali. Talks are underway for shared signal corridors between Burkina Faso and Niger. This isn't digital expansionism, it's continental symmetry. For decades, the narrative was that Africa needed handouts. Now, Burkina Faso is offering blueprints. The question that's keeping diplomats awake isn't whether Africa can be independent, it's whether the world is ready for an Africa that already is. If France loses technical access to its former colonies, what remains of its foreign leverage? If digital infrastructure becomes a marker of true independence, which other nations will follow the Traoré doctrine? Control over infrastructure isn't just technical, it's psychological. For the first time in generations, the cables under Burkinabé feet answer to Burkinabé shareholders. When the country controls the wires, the people control the message. When those who once stood powerless at disconnected corners now program the signal towers, everything changes. President Traoré made this explicit during a recent council briefing. Access is no longer a service, it is a birthright. That statement triggered diplomatic ripples across Europe and North America, but clarification never came from Ouagadougou. And why should it? If France controls its nuclear grid and Germany codes its banking software, why must Burkina Faso justify owning its telecom backbone? What Burkina Faso proved is simple but profound. Africa doesn't lack capability, it lacks permission. Permission that was never theirs to ask for in the first place. For decades, the assumption was that Africa needed training, but what if it only needed tools? What if independence doesn't begin at borders but at modems? When President Traoré stood before that fiber grid blueprint and declared, "We will not import identity," he wasn't speaking only for Burkina Faso. He was speaking for Nairobi, Bamako, Kinshasa, for every city where routers blink without control, where data flows without consent, where people are monitored but not served. As we speak, the data sovereignty protocols pioneered in Burkina Faso are being studied from Lagos to Cape Town. The Faso Tech Institute model is being replicated in universities across West Africa. Young engineers who grew up watching their internet connections controlled by foreign corporations are now designing systems that answer to no one but their own people. This is what victory looks like in the digital age, not military conquest or economic domination, but the simple revolutionary act of a people deciding to speak to each other without asking permission from those who never respected their voices. The fiber optic cables running beneath Burkinabé's soil aren't just carrying data, they're carrying dignity. The satellites orbiting overhead aren't just relaying signals, they're broadcasting a message to every corner of the continent. We can build our own future. What started as a telecommunications project has become something far more significant, a template for technological sovereignty that's spreading across Africa like wildfire. When systems think like their people, when protocols speak local languages, when servers store data without shipping it to foreign shores for analysis and profit, the entire relationship between technology and society transforms. The old narrative said Africa would always lag behind, that nations like Burkina Faso, landlocked, sanctioned, scarred by decades of dependency, could never lead the charge. But on that dry August morning in Ouagadougou, that narrative didn't just crack, It shattered. If this story moves you, if you felt the pulse of something historic unfolding in West Africa, we want to hear from you. Whether you're watching from Lagos, London, New York, or Nairobi, drop your city in the comments below. Tell us what you think of President Traoré's vision. Do you believe this is the future Africa deserves? If you're over 45 and this reminds you of how far we've come, share your thoughts. If you felt a surge of pride knowing that someone who looks like you wrote the code, soldered the wires, and flipped the switch, send this to your family, your community, your WhatsApp groups. Stories like these need to be told louder than our names were ever whispered. Africa isn't just catching up. We're building networks on our own terms, with our own hands, for our own future. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories of African innovation and independence. Like this video if you believe the continent's digital destiny belongs in African hands. And share it with everyone who needs to know that the age of asking permission is over. Because when Africa decides to connect itself, the signal reaches everywhere. Thank you for being here. The revolution will be digitized, and it will be African.